Aw, thanks, Evan. I love you too. The date was March 10th, 2018. It was a cold, but it was a tense morning, for it was the day of everybody's favorite standardized test, the SAT, the Asian equivalent of the Super Bowl, where one number could determine whether or not I received a nice pat on the back or a stern lecture by my mother on how I've dishonored my family. The test proctors had just finished passing out the answer booklets, and I was furiously filling out my personal information on the front page. First name Clifford, last name Vuong, birthday September 3rd, 2001, exam location Newark Memorial High School, race Asian. Now, my whole life I saw myself as Asian. Last time I checked, Vietnam is not annexed by China yet, so yes, we are still a sovereign country. But the more I think about it now, what does being Asian really mean? Well, I'll tell you what being Asian means according to society these days. Being Asian means you're smart. You have to have at least a 4.0 GPA. We never, ever get in trouble. We have to play one of the 3 instruments associated with Asians: the flute, the violin, and the piano. I don't know why. It's always one of those 3. We eat weird things, and apparently we can't drive. Well, let's see how I stack up. So, yeah, I have above a 4.0 GPA, so that checks out. That's number 1. 2. I never ever get in trouble. Well, that's true. If you go to Armando and ask him how many detentions I've had, he'll say 0. So that's pretty amazing, actually. 3, I have to play one of the Asian trifecta of instruments. And yes, I do. I play the violin or honor string orchestra, so that qualifies. 4, eat weird things. Well, from my personal experience, I can say that meats of the canine variety are quite delicious, and I would actually highly encourage everyone to try it at least once. And that we can't drive. I refuse to comment at this time. But is that what being Asian is all about? Being a weird, rice-eating, shy, law-abiding citizen? No, of course it's not. Asian Americans are one of the richest and most diverse group of individuals in this country. People with dreams, people with passion. But instead, these days, when you bring up the word Asian, one of the first images that will come to your head is that shy kid sitting in the corner of your classroom, slurping his noodles and doing differential calculus. Let's be real here. This skewed perception of the Asian American community is a sad consequence of the Asian model minority myth, a myth that for decades has reduced a rich and diverse group of Americans into a homogeneous soup of conformity. But how did this myth come to be? Well, I'm going to take you back to the Cold War. As many of you know, the United States was fighting the war against communism, against Russia. In addition to the fight of the spread of communism, the U.S. was also fighting another fight on the home front, the spread of Asians. Asian Americans have been immigrating to the United States and set quotas within U.S. immigration law since the California Gold Rush. Now, the Americans made it clear that they did not want these new immigrants to come here. They saw us as thieves and spies, conniving rapists out to get American women. The Soviets saw this fact, and they saw this as a huge opportunity. They decided to push out pro-communist propaganda to convert these new immigrants over to communism. I mean, think about it. Why would you want to stay in this society of these capitalist pigs who discriminate you and dehumanize you when you can just live in a communist utopia of the proletariat? That's pretty awesome. Now, of course, the United States, being the petty country we were and still are, we started freaking out. Like, freak out, all right? As a result, the United States began pushing out an anti-communist propaganda, highlighting the successes of various Asian businessmen, Asian painters, Asian actors. In addition, We passed the Immigration Act in 1965, which banned the usage of racial quotas within the U.S. immigration system, switching to a merit-based system where people were prioritized based on their education or whether or not they possessed special skills necessary to support the interests of the United States. These days, however, the Asian model minority myth has been utilized by Americans to pit minorities against each other. The Confucian ideology of a prioritization on education, self-sacrifice, family values, and societal conformity, it appealed to Americans. Rather than focus on the qualities of determination and hard work associated with every minority, Americans begin putting Asians on a higher pedestal of morality and achievement. They begin to shame other minorities, particularly African Americans. They started asking them, why can't you guys be as good as the Asians? While everyone is just distracted on this blame game, this pointing of fingers, Asian Americans have been left behind in the grand scheme of things. Our issues completely ignored by society. One of those issues is Asian poverty. Mainstream media will often tell you that Asian Americans make the highest income out of all of their peers, which is true. Asian Americans do in fact make a higher median income as compared to whites, African Americans, and Latinos. But of course, if you ask any mathematician, the median will never tell you the full story. Because if you were to zoom into the data, you'll see that actually 9% of Asian Americans are living under the poverty line, as opposed to 8% in white Americans. And we're not that far behind other minority groups either. In order to help you conceptualize what this 9% looks like, I'm going to tell you about one of my most favorite places in the whole wide world. Deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, there lies this little enclave called Little Saigon. Little Saigon, well, it literally screams of the motherland. From the smells of the street vendors just wafting over to your nose, the cars, the pollution, the crazy drunkles arguing about who won the poker game or the Chinese checkers game with this bottle of Heineken in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Maybe that's why Little Saigon and San Jose, in a nutshell, have the highest concentration of Vietnamese Americans. Now, in order to let you know that you've entered this little enclave, Little Saigon, there is this little concrete sign right outside. It's not much. It just says, "Welcome to Little Saigon, San Jose, California." Right next to this sign, however, you will find a little city. This city is made up of tarps, of tents, and of shopping carts. Yes, this is the home of the homeless community of Little Saigon, many of whom were South Vietnamese war veterans who were exiled from their country for fighting in something that they strongly believed in. This idea that Asian Americans are somehow better off than everyone else, it's completely ludicrous. And with poverty comes crime. Now, the United States prison system, when taking in inmate data, will often classify us into four different races: white, black, Latino, and other. Now, if you were to plot this data onto a bar graph, you can see that this other bar, it's considerably lower than the rest. Without further inspection, you can automatically assume that, yeah, white people, black people, and Latino people go to jail a lot, and apparently these other races don't. But what that graph fails to tell you, that this other column is actually made up of a majority of Asian Americans. We are apparently seen as such insignificant of a race in inmate data that we don't even deserve our own bar. As a result, any appreciable rise in Asian American incarceration rates can simply be shrugged off as a rise in incarceration rates of other races. Combined with the Asian model minority myth, this idea that Asians are these societal role models who never get in trouble, it stresses out our youth. Maybe that's why the leading cause of death for Asian Americans aged 15 to 24 is suicide. And that Asian American college students are more likely, as compared to their peers, to either have suicidal thoughts or to actually attempt suicide. Being an Asian American, to live with these societal expectations, is a complete onslaught. You have to go to this college. You have to act a certain way. You have to get these grades. And for many of my brothers and sisters, there will come a time when we'll be given the option to either adapt to these societal expectations or to simply abandon them. And unfortunately, many of us have ventured into the second path. They abandon their culture. They fear this monotonous, this stifling lifestyle the Asian model minority myth has confined them in. They're afraid that by accepting their culture, they're going to become nobody in a world where in order to be successful, you have to be somebody. They trade their T4 for Starbucks, the rice for pasta. To them, the societal expectation that society has imposed on them, this path of quote-unquote success, it's not for them. And I know for a fact that that success is not for me. This past summer, I was given the opportunity to go to Annapolis, Maryland at the United States Naval Academy and attend the Naval Academy Summer Seminar. For 1 week, I was immersed within the military lifestyle, from the 0500 PT to the close order drill, to the detailers screaming every imaginable name under the sun at you to get you to do more pull-ups, to the sanctioned hazing by your commanding officers. I came back from that experience thinking, wow, where was this all my life? From that point on, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to become a naval officer in the United States Armed Forces. When I told my mother about what I wanted to do with my life, she was disappointed and on the verge of tears. Oh, Cliff, why can't you be a normal kid? Why can't you go to med school like your cousins? Well, I told my mom that my passion isn't doing a residency at Stanford Hospital, and my passion isn't working at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. To me, my passion is giving up my life, giving up my dreams, my blood, sweat, and tears for a country that gave my family home when we needed it the most. This is a place I am proud to call home, and there is no other obligation I will be willing to take up freely for a responsibility to protect it. But of course, no home is perfect. Change has to start from within our own communities. And if there is one thing I know that can incite change, it is the right to vote here in America. Now, Asian voter turnout, I'm just going to put this straight. It's been absolutely pathetic. Asian Americans only make up 5.6% of the American population. Yet it is projected that by 2044, we will be 1/10 of the voting population. Yet, how come only 44% of us are actually registered to vote, as compared to 66% in African American voters and 64% in white voters? And then there's the language barrier. About 35% of Asian adults experience limited English proficiency. Now, I know what you're all probably thinking. Oh, Cliff, they make all these voter guides in all these different languages. I'm pretty sure you can find one in Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, all that. Well, you're right. But that doesn't help if 3/4 of Asians don't even know about how our political system works, or even how to cast a ballot. Have you ever tried explaining to your 80-year-old Asian grandmother that the voter guides are not coupons for 99 Ranch? It is the hardest thing you will ever have to do. You should try it sometime. What's even more interesting, however, is the role that politicians play in disenfranchising the Asian American vote. See, these politicians, they've been conditioned in the Asian model minority myth. They believe that we, as an entire minority, that we are hard work and studious, non-disruptive people with no issues to address. They'd rather focus time and campaign money into their view of these quote-unquote real minorities who have real problems. And as a result, their legislation and their work, it just doesn't appeal to us. And we're demotivated to show up at the polls. Why would I go vote for something that I don't care about? Just think about it. If Epicurean were to say they were going to serve salad for the rest of the year and nothing else, and they put that to a vote, why would I even show up at the polls when I already hate salad? And as a result of this ignorance by our politicians, by skipping over us like a flyby state, politicians are discouraging Asian Americans to fulfill their basic civic duty as Americans. We are effectively threatening the foundations of democracy bestowed upon us by our founding fathers. And with systematic neglect comes complete apathy for social issues in this country. Issues like Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ movement, and women's rights. Asians reason, hey, this doesn't affect me. Why should I care? Why should I care about what this black person is doing in the projects when I'm living a comfortable life of my own? It's completely wrong. But you also have to realize that when Asian Americans came to this country, they were experiencing for the first time a melting pot of cultures. This was going to be the first time they saw a black person or a gay person as compared to the homogenous racial inequality back in their own home countries. And then the rumors start coming up. Oh, I heard that black people, all they do is steal things and kill each other. Oh, didn't you hear? Gay people, they all have AIDS. Rumors started by a few racist, bigoted, and ignorant Americans. And then they look at us and they say, wow, look at you Asians. You guys never do anything wrong. You guys are freaking great. Keep up the good work. And these poor immigrants, they don't know what to think. They're working day and night in these jobs to put food on the table for the families. The last thing they need to worry about is women's rights and climate change. Once again, this is all wrong. Historically, Asians have always stood up in the face of oppression. When the French marched into Southeast Asia, our people, the Laotians, the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, we formed guerrilla groups and resistance groups to push these invaders out of the place that we call home. When the Spanish came to invade the Philippines, the Filipino people gave their flesh and their blood to preserve their way of life. Standing up for what is right, it's in our blood. It's in our history. To not act against oppression, it's against our very nature. There used to be a time when it was wrong to stand up for an African American man when he was being harassed. It was a status quo. No one questioned it. But over time, brave African Americans stood up for what was right and rewrote the narrative of Black history. As Asian Americans, we have that exact same power to rise up and rewrite our own personal narratives. To the 35% of Morrow Catholic students who identify as Asian or Pacific Islander, I want you to be proud of who you are. It doesn't matter if you go to Yale or you go to Chabot. The sheer fact that you even made it to college is already a step up from what our parents had to go through. The Asian American experience is defined by the qualities of diligence, sacrifice, and hard work that brought previous generations over to this country. And it is every immigrant's dream that future generations will be able to do better than they did. If you are able to accomplish that, I promise you, your parents will be proud of you no matter what. My fellow Asian Americans, it is time to rise up and join hands with our African American, our Latino, and yes, even our white brothers and sisters. Because everyone, no matter what race or ethnicity, has their own struggle, has their own story to tell. Instead of generalizing and putting each other down and making myths about each other, maybe it's time we start listening to each other instead. Thank you. Thank you.